Hello and welcome to True Crime Sleep Stories. Settle into your bed, listeners, and let the world fade away to a whisper. Picture a small farmhouse in Hydesville, New York, where winter wind rattles the windows and the night wraps the fields in a quiet chill. It's 1848, and in this humble home, a mystery unfolds, its eerie sounds echoing through time. This is the story of the Fox Sisters, a tale of ghostly whispers and hidden truths woven to haunt the mind until its secrets are revealed. Breathe deeply and let this chilling mystery carry you gently into your dreams. But before we dive into tonight's tale, a quick note. CrimeCon 2025 is coming up September 5th through the 7th in Denver, Colorado, and I would love for you to join me. Use my discount code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at checkout to save 10% on your tickets. Plus, show your ticket or code receipt at my table for a free signed copy of my book. I can't wait to meet you there. Now, let's step into the shadows of this story. In the winter of 1848, Hydesville was a quiet hamlet, its wooden houses scattered across snowy fields, the air sharp with the scent of pine and frost. The Fox family, John and Margaret, with their daughters Maggie, age 14, and Kate, age 11, had recently moved into a modest farmhouse, its walls creaking with age. The townsfolk were simple, their lives tied to the land, their evenings spent by candlelight. But in March of 1848, strange noises began to disturb the Fox household. At night, when the family tried to sleep, sharp raps echoed from the walls. Tap, 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 like knuckles striking wood. The sounds moved, now from the floor, and then from the ceiling, as if an unseen presence roamed the house. The raps grew bolder, waking the family up night after night. Maggie and Kate, sharing a bedroom, would huddle under the blankets, their breath catching as the knocks seemed to answer their whispers. One night, Kate, bold despite her fear, called out to the darkness, "Do as I do," and clapped her hands. The raps replied, mimicking her rhythm. 2 claps, 2 knocks. The family gathered, their candles casting flickering shadows, and tested the phenomenon. They asked questions. "How many children do we have?" The raps answered correctly. 4 sharp knocks. "Is this a spirit?" A single loud rap shook the room. The air grew heavy, the house alive with an unseen force. The word of the rapping spread through Hydesville, drawing neighbors to the farmhouse. The knocks continued, now spelling out messages by counting raps for letters of the alphabet. The spirit, they claimed, was a peddler, a man who had died in the house years before, his body hidden in the cellar. The Foxes dug into the dirt floor, finding only a few bones. Human, some whispered, though none could be sure. The town buzzed with fear and wonder, the farmhouse now a place of pilgrimage. The raps followed the sisters, even when they stayed with neighbors. as if the spirit clung to them. Shadows seemed to move in the corners, and a cold draft swept through the rooms even on still nights. The mystery deepened as the sisters were sent to Rochester to live with their older sister, Leah, a music teacher with a sharp mind. The rappings followed, growing louder and more complex. Tables tilted, chairs slid across the floor, and faint voices seemed to whisper in the dark. Leah, seeing opportunity, declared Maggie and Kate as mediums, able to communicate with the dead. Seances were held, the sisters at the center, their hands trembling as the spirits answered with knocks. Rochester's elite flocked to witness the phenomenon, their candles illuminating faces pale with awe. The spirits spoke of lost loves, hidden secrets, and the peddler's restless soul, his death a mystery tied to the Hydesville house. The phenomenon birthed a movement called spiritualism, a belief that the living could speak to the dead. By 1850, the Fox sisters were famous, their seances drawing crowds across New York, Boston, and beyond. The rappings grew more elaborate, messages spelled out, objects moving, ghostly hands touching those who sat in the circle. Whispers of a murdered peddler haunted the story, his spirit demanding justice. Some claimed to see his figure, a shadowy man with hollow eyes, standing in the corner during the seances. Others reported strange illnesses after attending, their dreams filled with the sound of raps. In Hydesville, a local man, rumored to have lived in the house before the Foxes, vanished without a trace, his disappearance fueling tales of a curse. Another, a skeptic who mocked the sisters, was found dead in his barn, his death unexplained, but his face frozen in fear. Investigators, both scientific and spiritual, flocked to the sisters. Doctors and professors tested the rappings, searching for wires and hidden voices, but found nothing. The knocks came from beneath the floor, inside the walls, even from within the sisters' own bodies, defying explanation. Some spoke of a demonic force, others of a restless spirit tied to a forgotten crime. The peddler's story grew. A man named Charles Rosna, some said, killed for his wares, his body buried in the cellar. Yet no records confirmed his existence, and the bones found were too few to prove a murder. The mystery of the rappings captivated the nation. The Fox sisters at its heart, their faces solemn as they channeled the unseen. Years passed and the sisters' fame grew, but so did the whispers of doubt. Spiritualism spread, with mediums springing up across the country, but the Fox sisters remained its origin. Their seances filled theaters, their hands guiding spirits to speak. Yet, the knocks were inconsistent, sometimes faint, sometimes absent. Skeptics pressed harder, noting the sisters' youth and their knack for performance. The vanished man and the dead skeptic, were they tied to the spirits or something more earthly? The house in Hydesville stood empty, its cellar silent. But the town never forgot the raps that shook its peace. In 1888, the mystery unraveled, its truth as startling as the knocks themselves. Maggie Fox stood before a crowded theater in New York City and confessed. The rappings, she said, were a hoax, begun as a childish prank. She and Kate, bored in the quiet farmhouse, had discovered that they could crack their toe joints to mimic knocks, hiding the tricks from their parents. The sounds, amplified by the house's wooden walls, fooled everyone. The peddler's story was fiction, spun to captivate neighbors. Leah, seeing profit, turned the prank into a career, coaching the girls to perform seances. The bones in the cellar, likely animal, were a convenient prop. The shadowy figure, the tables moving, all staged, a blend of sleight of hand and suggestion. The true crime was one of deception. The sisters earned thousands, their seances feeding the nation's hunger for the supernatural. Spiritualism, built on their lie, drew millions, some losing their fortunes to false mediums who followed their lead. The vanished man and the dead skeptic, though eerie, were unrelated coincidences seized by the sisters to fuel their myth. Hydesville suffered, its name tied to a ghost that never was. Maggie's confession shocked believers, but Kate, struggling with alcoholism, wavered, later claiming that some rappings were real. The sisters faded into obscurity, their lives marked by poverty and regret, the movement they sparked outliving their truth. Hydesville returned to its quiet ways, the farmhouse long gone, its fields reclaimed by time. The raps were silent, but the story of the Fox sisters endured. A tale of belief and betrayal, of a mystery that captivated until its heart was laid bare. Thank you for listening to this episode of True Crime Sleep Stories. As you drift towards sleep, picture the snowy fields of Hydesville, the moonlight soft on the empty land where a farmhouse once stood. The spirits may never have been real, but the mystery of human longing lingers as a whisper in the night. What drives a prank to become a legend? Let that question fade like starlight, carrying you into dreams. The truth rests in Hydesville. But for now, sleep easy, wrapped in the calm of this tale. Good night. Sleep tight. Don't let the monsters bite. Hello and welcome to True Crime Sleep Stories. It's time for you to settle in, dim the lights and get comfortable because tonight's tale is one that's as horrifying as it is haunting. But first, I've got some exciting news you won't want to miss. CrimeCon 2025 is right around the corner, and it's happening this September 5th through the 7th in Denver, Colorado. It's the ultimate true crime experience, and I would love to see you there. I've got an exclusive 10% discount code just for you. Use the code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at checkout to grab your tickets. And as a thank you for being such an amazing listener, if you stop by my table with your ticket or code receipt, I'll have a free signed copy of my book, True Crime Sleep Stories, waiting just for you. I can't wait to meet you face to face. And now we're diving into the dark and twisted story of Albert Fish, a man whose crimes defy comprehension. His chilling legacy is one that will likely stick with you long after this episode ends. It's a story you won't soon forget. And now, let's get started. In the shadowy corners of American crime, few figures evoke as much dread and bewilderment as Hamilton Howard Albert Fish. Born on May 19, 1870, Fish's life would unfold to paint a sinister tapestry of murder, cannibalism, and depravity that defies comprehension. Known by a plethora of chilling monikers, the Gray Man, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, and the Boogeyman, Fish's reign of terror spanned the mid-1920s, leaving an indelible mark on the nation. Fish's heinous acts included at least 3 confirmed child murders between July 1924 and June 1928. Yet his confessions alluded to a far more extensive and darker repertoire, hinting at a possible 100 victims. Arrested on December 13, 1934, Fish faced justice for the heinous kidnapping and murder of young Grace Budd. In what became a highly publicized trial, he was convicted and subsequently executed by electric chair on January 16, 1936, at the age of 65. Albert Fish's early years foreshadowed the chaos and malevolence that characterized his later life. Born in Washington, D.C. to Randall Fish, a man 43 years his mother's senior, and Ellen Frances Howell, Albert was the youngest of 4 children. The Fish family was deeply entangled with mental illness. His uncle and several siblings were plagued by various psychological disorders, a familial curse that seemed to extend to Fish himself. After his father's sudden death from a heart attack, young Albert Fish found himself thrust into the harsh environment of St. John's Orphanage, where he endured and disturbingly embraced frequent beatings. Freed from the orphanage's clutches by his mother in 1880, Fish's life took a darker turn in 1882, when at just 12 years old he began a relationship with a telegraph boy. This association introduced him to disturbing practices, including the consumption of human waste, setting Fish on a path of deviant behavior. He became a familiar face at public baths, fixated on watching other boys undress, a harbinger of the predatory tendencies that would later define his criminal career. Albert Fish's infamy was further fueled by his penchant for writing obscene letters to women, sourced from personal ads and matrimonial agencies. These letters, laced with lewdness and menace, provided a glimpse into the warped psyche of a man who thrived on fear and inflicted pain. As we explore the harrowing chapters of Albert Fish's life and crimes, we unravel the complexities of a man whose malevolence seemed boundless. In understanding Fish, we confront the chilling reality of human darkness at its most extreme. In the bustling heart of New York City around 1890, a young man named Albert Fish arrived, wide-eyed and eager to make his mark. At just 20 years old, the city offered Fish more than he could have imagined, a place where shadows lingered in every corner and secrets whispered through alleys. It was in this labyrinth of anonymity that Fish began a chilling chapter of his life, seeking out the vulnerable and indulging in dark desires that would haunt him for decades. Fish's early years in New York were marked by disturbing behavior. He engaged in male prostitution and preyed upon young boys, most under the tender age of 6, leaving a trail of trauma in his wake. By 1898, Fish's life took a seemingly normal turn when his mother arranged a marriage to Anna Mary Hoffman, 9 years his junior. Together, they had 6 children: Albert, Anna, Gertrude, Eugene, John, and Henry. Yet beneath this facade of domesticity lay Fish's compulsion for criminality. In 1903, he found himself behind bars at Sing Sing prison, convicted of grand larceny. For his children, life seemed ordinary until 1917, when the family unit shattered. Fish's wife abandoned him for another man, leaving Fish grappling with reality and the task of raising their children alone. Disturbingly, it was during this tumultuous time that his children noted Fish's penchant for bizarre games. One particularly chilling activity involved them paddling their father with a nail-studded paddle until blood flowed, a testament to Fish's twisted desires. His self-inflicted punishments grew increasingly grotesque, embedding needles into his flesh and setting wool aflame inside his body. After his wife's departure, Fish's correspondence with women revealed another layer of his depravity. He wrote letters detailing horrific sexual fantasies, though none of these women responded to his macabre proposals. With no partner to fulfill his desires, Fish traveled extensively, painting houses across various states. Some believe his choice of location was strategic, targeting areas with large African American populations, under the assumption that their disappearances would provoke less attention. In 1910, Fish's depravity reached new depths when he met Thomas Bedden in Delaware. Their relationship culminated in a horrific 2-week ordeal of torture. Fish's sadistic tendencies manifested into a nightmarish scene, culminating in the mutilation of Bedden's body, a memory Fish recounted with chilling detachment. What began as an unsettling alliance quickly spiraled into a nightmarish descent, shrouded in the murky waters of sadomasochism. The dynamics of their relationship were ambiguous at best, with Bedden's potential cognitive impairments casting shadows over the question of consent. After a brief 10-day period, Fish transported Bedden to an isolated farmhouse, a setting that would become the backdrop for 2 weeks of unimaginable torment. Fish's acts of cruelty escalated to a horrifying climax when he bound Bedden and severed half of his penis. The chilling memory of Bedden's screams and the haunting gaze he cast upon Fish was something the perpetrator would later recall vividly, a grim testament to the horror of that moment. Fish's original plan was even more macabre. He intended to end Bedden's life, dismember his body, and take the remains home as grotesque trophies. However, the oppressive heat of the season posed a risk for attracting unwanted attention, forcing Fish to abandon his grisly intentions. In a bizarre twist of care mixed with cruelty, Fish attempted a rudimentary treatment, pouring peroxide over the wound and wrapping it with a Vaseline-soaked handkerchief. He left Bedden with a $10 bill, a final twisted gesture of farewell before kissing him goodbye. Boarding the first train he could find, Fish fled the scene, never once looking back or seeking to discover Bedden's fate. The incident became another dark chapter in Fish's life. The unraveling of Fish's psyche continued as he experienced vivid auditory hallucinations and engaged in relentless self-harm. He wrapped himself in carpets and claimed to follow divine instructions. X-rays later revealed a grotesque collection of needles embedded within his body, physical evidence of the man's tormented mind. While his children bore witness to his peculiar behaviors, Fish never directed his violence towards them. Yet, he drew them into his world, encouraging their participation in his bizarre rituals. The boundaries between pain and pleasure blurred as Fish descended further into madness. Albert Fish's early adulthood paints the portrait of a man whose life was anything but ordinary. His story stands as a chilling tale of how deeply one can descend into darkness. In the shadowy alleys of Georgetown around 1919, Albert Fish's sinister proclivities began to surface with chilling intensity. His first known attack was on a vulnerable young boy with intellectual disabilities. Fish, guided by his twisted rationale, targeted those he deemed invisible to society, often selecting victims who were either mentally disabled or African American, believing that their disappearances would just go unnoticed. Fish's depravity knew no bounds. He sometimes paid boys to lure other children into his grasp, ensnaring his victims with promises that hid his gruesome intentions. Once captured, these innocent souls faced Fish's self-proclaimed implements of hell, including a meat cleaver, a butcher knife, and a small hand saw, tools of torture and death that became synonymous with his reign of terror. On the quiet afternoon of July 11, 1924, in Staten Island, 8-year-old Beatrice Keel was playing alone on her family's farm. Fish approached her with a cynical facade of kindness, offering money to help him search for rhubarb. Fortunately, Beatrice's mother sensed danger and intervened just in time, driving Fish away. Undeterred, Fish returned later that night, seeking refuge in their barn. It was here that Beatrice's father discovered him, forcing the intruder to flee once more. Fish's mental state continued to deteriorate. By 1924, at 54 years old and suffering from psychosis, he claimed divine voices commanded him to commit unspeakable acts of torture and mutilation against children. One day, while contemplating his next move, he sought out a 10-year-old boy he had previously molested, Cyril Quinn. Fish approached Cyril and his friend as they played boxball, offering them lunch. Once inside Fish's apartment, the young boys inadvertently uncovered his arsenal of horror hidden beneath the mattress. Terrified by the sight, they fled, unknowingly escaping a horrendous fate. Meanwhile, Fish's personal life mirrored the chaos within him. Despite already being married, he wed Estella Wilcox on February 6, 1930, in Waterloo, New York. This union swiftly disintegrated, ending in divorce after just 1 week. His behavior continued to spiral out of control, leading to a series of arrests, including one for sending an obscene letter to a woman responding to a maid advertisement. These repeated brushes with the law eventually landed Fish in Bellevue Hospital for psychiatric observation, where experts attempted to understand the mind of this man who eluded moral and legal constraints. This period of Fish's life reveals a decade-long descent into darkness, marked by a profound disconnect from reality and a relentless pursuit of malevolent desires. The chilling events surrounding the murder of young Grace Budd began on a seemingly ordinary day in May 1928. Albert Fish was perusing the classifieds in the Sunday edition of the New York World. One advertisement caught his attention. A young man named Edward Budd was seeking employment in the countryside. Fish, then 58 years old, saw an opportunity not just for employment, but for something far more sinister. On May 28th, Fish visited the Budd family in Manhattan, posing as Frank Howard, a farmer from Farmingdale, New York. His story was convincing, and he promised to hire Edward and his friend, weaving a tale that would soon turn dark. Though Fish's initial plan involved Edward, it was the presence of Edward's younger sister, 10-year-old Grace, that shifted his malevolent intentions. Fish concocted a story about attending a niece's birthday party, persuading Delia Bridget Flanagan and Albert Francis Budd Sr., Grace's unsuspecting parents, to allow her to accompany him. Trustingly, they agreed and sent Grace into the clutches of a monster. Fish led her to a house he had selected in East Irvington, New York, Wisteria Cottage. It was there that the unimaginable occurred. In the isolation of that house, Fish carried out his horrific plans. He strangled Grace to death, then gruesomely dismembered her body. Over the following days, Fish engaged in acts of cannibalism, leaving behind a haunting legacy of horror and despair. The investigation into Grace's disappearance initially led to Charles Edward Pope, a superintendent who was wrongfully accused and spent over 3 months in jail before being found not guilty. The true perpetrator, Albert Fish, remained free for several more years. It wasn't until November 1934 that the truth began to unravel. An anonymous letter arrived at the Budd household, its contents revealing the disturbing narrative of Grace's fate. Grace's mother, unable to read, had her son decipher the letter, a brutal recounting of events penned by Fish himself. The letter began with an unsettling story about cannibalism during a famine in China, a tale meant to rationalize Fish's own dark cravings. The chilling confession detailed Fish's actions on the day he took Grace, his calculated deceit, and the appalling acts that followed.
My dear Mrs. Budd, in 1894, a friend of mine shipped as a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco for Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and 2 others went ashore and got drunk. When they returned, the boat was gone. At that time, there was famine in China. Meat of any kind was from $1 to $3 a pound. So great was the suffering among the very poor that all children under 12 were sold for food in order to keep others from starving. A boy or girl under 14 was not safe in the street. You could go in any shop and ask for steak chops or stew meat. Part of the naked body of a boy or girl would be brought out and just what you wanted cut from it. John stayed sick there so long he acquired a taste for human flesh. On his return to NY, he stole 2 boys, one 7, one 11, took them to his home, stripped them naked, tied them in a closet, then burned everything they had on. Several times every day and night, he spanked them, tortured them, to make their meat good and tender. He told me so often how good human flesh was, I made up my mind to taste it. On Sunday, June the 3rd, 1928, I called on you. We had lunch. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her. On the pretense of taking her to a party, you said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run down the stairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. She died a virgin.
The letter spun a tale involving Captain Davis and a famine in distant Hong Kong, a narrative that investigators struggled to substantiate. However, when it came to the grim details surrounding the murder of young Grace Budd, the letter's accuracy was unnervingly precise. The description of Grace's abduction and the subsequent events proved to align disturbingly well with the known facts of the case. Yet the ultimate horror lay in the unverified claim that Fish had resorted to cannibalism, consuming parts of the innocent child's body. This assertion, while never conclusively proven, cast a sinister shadow over an already horrific crime, leaving a lingering question that would forever unsettle the minds of those who dared to traverse the dark corridors of this chilling narrative. In New York City, a seemingly innocuous letter arrived that would unravel a chilling mystery. The envelope bore a unique hexagonal emblem embossed with the letters NYPCBA, the insignia of the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. What connected this stationery to a gruesome crime was a twist of fate. A janitor who once worked for the association casually mentioned to the police that he had taken some of the stationery home. However, he had left it behind at his previous lodging, a rooming house at 200 East 52nd Street, when he relocated. This small detail turned out to be a pivotal clue. The landlady of the rooming house recalled a tenant named Albert Fish, who had checked out just days earlier. She mentioned that Fish's son regularly sent him money, and Fish had instructed her to hold on to his check. Detective William King, the investigator leading the case, decided to stake out the rooming house. His patience was rewarded when Fish eventually returned. Without raising suspicion, Fish agreed to accompany King to the police headquarters for questioning. However, once there, Fish revealed a hidden razor blade, his intentions unclear, but clearly sinister. Detective King swiftly disarmed him, ensuring Fish would be brought to justice. In a shocking confession, Fish did not hesitate to admit to the murder of young Grace Budd. He revealed that his original plan was to kill her brother, Edward. It was a warm evening on July 14, 1924, when the peaceful community of Port Richmond, Staten Island, was shattered by the disappearance of young Frances McDonnell. The 9-year-old had been playing catch with friends, a simple pastime that soon turned into tragedy. When Frances failed to return home, alarm spread through the neighborhood, prompting a frantic search. The following day, the horror was unveiled. Frances's lifeless body was discovered hanging from a tree in a wooded area near his residence. He had been subjected to unspeakable violence, sexually assaulted, strangled with his own suspenders, and brutally mutilated. The autopsy revealed gruesome lacerations across his legs and abdomen, with his left hamstring nearly stripped bare of flesh. Initially, it seemed there was no clear suspect, but whispers of a shadowy figure emerged. Friends of Frances recounted seeing the boy playing with an elderly man sporting a gray mustache. One neighbor corroborated their account, having observed the duo walking into the nearby woods. Frances's mother, Anna, provided an eerie description of the stranger. She recalled seeing an old man with thick gray hair and a drooping gray mustache who had shuffled down the street, mumbling incoherently while gesturing oddly with his hands. It was a haunting description that gave rise to the moniker, the Gray Man. Despite the police's efforts, the case went cold until it was rekindled by the murder of Grace Budd. Eyewitnesses, including a local farmer, recognized Albert Fish as the strange figure seen on the day of Frances's disappearance. Though Fish initially denied involvement, he eventually confessed to the murder after his trial for Grace Budd's murder concluded. The New York Daily Mirror would later label Fish as the most vicious child slayer in criminal history. Fast forward to February 11, 1927, in Brooklyn, where the atmosphere was thick with mystery and fear. 3-year-old Billy Beaton and his older brother had been playing in their apartment hallway with 4-year-old Billy Gaffney. When the older brother briefly returned to their apartment, both younger boys vanished. Billy Beaton was later found on the roof, but there was no sign of Billy Gaffney. When questioned, Billy Beaton offered a chilling response.
The Boogeyman took him.
Initially, suspicion fell upon serial killer Peter Kuzanowski, but the case took a chilling turn when Joseph Meehan, a trolley motorman, identified Fish from a newspaper photo. Meehan vividly recalled an old man attempting to calm a distressed little boy on a trolley, believed to be Gaffney. The boy, missing his jacket and crying for his mother, was dragged off the vehicle by the man. Police discovered that Fish had been working as a house painter in Brooklyn, just a short distance from where Gaffney disappeared. Despite her grief, Elizabeth Gaffney, Billy's mother, confronted Fish in Sing Sing prison, yet Fish refused to divulge any details about her son's fate. However, Fish later composed a letter to his attorney describing in harrowing detail the grotesque acts he had committed against Billy. His words painted a macabre picture of brutality and cannibalism, acts that defy comprehension. This confession not only cemented Fish's legacy as an unrepentant monster, but also underscored the depths of his depravity.
I brought him to the Riker Avenue dumps. There is a house that stands alone, not far from where I took him. I took the G-boy there, stripped him naked, and tied his hands and feet and gagged him with a piece of dirty rag I picked out of the dump. Then I burned his clothes, threw his shoes in the dump. Then I walked back and took trolley to 59th Street at 2 a.m. and walked home from there. Next day, about 2 p.m., I took tools, a good heavy cat of 9 tails, homemade, short handle, cut one of my belts in half, slit these half in 6 strips about 8 inches long. I whipped his bare behind till the blood ran from his legs. Then I cut him up. I came home with my meat. I had the front of his body I liked best. I put in onions, carrots, turnips, celery, salt and pepper. It was good. I ate every bit of the meat in about 4 days.
His heinous acts serve as a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the veneer of normalcy. The trial of Albert Fish, a man whose crimes were as chilling as they were complex, commenced on March 11, 1935, in the quiet town of White Plains, New York. Presiding over the courtroom was Judge Frederick P. Close, while the prosecution was led by the determined Westchester County Chief Assistant District Attorney, Elbert F. Gallagher. Opposing them was Fish's defense attorney, James Dempsey, a former prosecutor with the added political clout of being a one-time mayor of Peekskill, New York. For 10 grueling days, the courtroom became a theater of horror and disbelief as the details of Fish's heinous crimes were meticulously laid bare. Defending himself with a plea of insanity, Fish claimed to hear divine voices commanding him to murder children. Dempsey portrayed Fish as a psychiatric phenomenon, citing a staggering array of sexually deviant behaviors, including sadism, masochism, and even cannibalism. Central to the defense's argument was the testimony of Dr. Frederick Wortham, a psychiatrist renowned for his focus on child development. Over 2 exhaustive days, Wortham dissected Fish's distorted psyche, framing his obsession with biblical sacrifices as both a twisted penance and a misguided quest for atonement. Through Wortham's narrative, Fish emerged as a man who interpreted religious communion as an excuse for cannibalism, a disturbing reflection of his warped reality. When asked about Fish's mental state, Wortham concluded concisely and powerfully, "He is insane." Yet, the prosecution countered with its own experts, challenging the notion of Fish's insanity. Manus Gregory, a former manager at Bellevue Hospital where Fish had been treated, argued that while Fish was undoubtedly abnormal, he was not insane by psychiatric standards. Further testimony from Charles Lambert and James Vavasseur suggested that Fish's peculiar proclivities, shocking as they were, fell within the realm of common, albeit socially unacceptable, perversions. The defense also presented Mary Nichols, Fish's young stepdaughter, who recounted disturbing childhood games that hinted at Fish's deviant inclinations. However, despite the defense's efforts and the jurors' shared belief in Fish's insanity, the prevailing sentiment was one of justice, a justice demanding retribution. Thus, the jury returned a verdict of sanity and guilt, sealing Fish's fate with a sentence of death by electrocution. On January 16, 1936, Fish met his end in the electric chair at Sing Sing Prison. Remarkably composed, he aided the executioner in positioning the electrodes upon his body. When questioned about his impending fate, Fish simply stated,
"I don't even know why I'm here."
The execution was fraught with rumors, including tales of needles embedded in his body, causing a circuit malfunction, later debunked as mere legend. In the aftermath, Fish's attorney, James Dempsey, confronted a media frenzy, eager for a glimpse into the mind of one of history's most notorious criminals. Clutching Fish's final written statement, Dempsey refused to share its contents, describing it only as the most filthy string of obscenities he had ever encountered. The tale of Albert Fish concluded, yet the echoes of his horrific deeds continue to haunt history. In his wake, Fish left a grim legacy marked by the lives he shattered and the innocence he stole. His actions carved a dark path through the early 20th century. Albert Fish's shadow loomed heavily over the early 20th century, leaving a trail of victims, some known and others only speculated upon. In the tangled web of his macabre deeds, each victim and their grieving families warrant somber remembrance. His known victims, from 1924 to 1928, included at least 3 children: Francis McDonnell, Billy Gaffney, and Grace Budd. Despite Fish's denial of further murders, authorities suspected his involvement in numerous other unsolved cases. Detective William King harbored suspicions that Fish might be the elusive Brooklyn vampire, a predator who targeted the young and vulnerable around the New York City area. One such case involved Yetta Abramowitz, a 12-year-old girl who was strangled and brutally beaten atop a Bronx apartment building on May 14, 1927. Witnesses reported seeing a man resembling Fish attempting to lure young girls into alleyways on that same day. Then there was Mary Ellen O'Connor, a 16-year-old whose mutilated body was discovered near a property Fish had been painting in Far Rockaway, Queens, on February 15, 1932. Her murder remains a chilling mystery, potentially tied to Fish. Fish chillingly boasted of sexually assaulting over 100 boys, many of whom were marginalized due to race or disability, a grim testament to his belief that justice would bypass these victims. In one of his most horrifying claims, he alleged that he murdered a child in each of the 23 states where he resided. Among these potential victims were Emma Richardson, a 5-year-old whose life was cut short on October 3, 1926, Emil Ailing, a 4-year-old taken on July 13, 1930, Robin Jane Liu, a 6-year-old lost on May 3, 1931, and Benjamin Collings, who at 17 faced an untimely death on December 15, 1932. Few figures evoke as much horror and revulsion as Albert Fish. Often regarded as one of the most depraved serial killers of all time, Fish's heinous acts defy comprehension and challenge the very limits of human morality. While his severe mental illness is undeniable, many argue that justice was served with his execution, as his crimes left a scar on the collective conscience that can never be fully healed. Fish's story is a haunting illustration of the malevolence that can lie dormant within the human psyche, waiting to surface in the most terrifying ways. His confessions, both chilling and revolting, offer a glimpse into a mind twisted beyond repair, driven by urges that defy rational understanding. The suspected breadth of his crimes suggests an insatiable appetite for suffering, making him a specter whose legacy is one of unrelenting darkness. This narrative serves as a sobering reminder of the evil that can exist behind the guise of normalcy, prompting us to ponder the complexities of human nature and the depths of depravity to which it can sink. Fish's tale forces us to confront not only the lives irrevocably altered by his actions, but also our own understanding of justice and redemption. It's a chilling chronicle that compels us to reflect on the fragile boundary between sanity and madness, normality and monstrosity. And that's the unnerving story of Albert Fish, a man whose actions were beyond comprehension, beyond human. It's almost too much to believe, isn't it? A true monster hiding in plain sight, preying on the innocent. If you're like me, the chills from this tale might still be running down your spine. You might even find yourself laying awake tonight, replaying the horror we've just uncovered. And honestly, who could blame you? Before you turn out the lights now, take a moment to check those doors and windows. Double lock them, look under your bed, and look in your closet. It's a small comfort, but one we all deserve after a story like this. Thank you for listening and spending your evening with me. Sleep well, if you can. Good night, and stay safe out there. Hello, and welcome to True Crime Sleep Stories. Tonight, we'll take a quiet walk into the shadows of Austin, Texas, a city known for lively music, good food, and warm nights that stretch long into the early morning hours. Just beyond the downtown lights, where the Colorado River winds its way through the heart of the city, lies Lady Bird Lake, a calm body of water with a troubled undercurrent. Over the past few years, something strange has begun to whisper through the streets of Austin. A growing number of young men, often athletic, intelligent, and out enjoying the nightlife, have vanished, only to be found later in the murky waters of Lady Bird Lake. No single cause, no clear pattern, just the same eerie ending again and again. Local authorities have said there's no foul play, but online forums, grieving families, and curious residents aren't so sure. They ask a question that lingers like mist over the water. Is there a serial killer stalking Austin's streets? But before we get into tonight's story, I have a special announcement. CrimeCon 2025 is right around the corner. Mark your calendars for September 5th through 7th, 2025, and join me in Denver, Colorado for the ultimate true crime experience. You can get 10% off your ticket using my exclusive discount code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at checkout. As a special thank you to my listeners, stop by my table with your ticket code receipt because I'll have a free signed copy of my book waiting just for you. Come say hi. I can't wait to meet you at CrimeCon 2025 in Denver, Colorado. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's float quietly down this river of mystery where the truth sleeps just below the surface. Austin, Texas, a city that hums with music, laughter, and movement. A city alive with color and culture, where streets pulse with the rhythm of life and the promise of something always happening just around the corner. But like every city, Austin has its quiet places too. And sometimes it's in the quiet where the unsettling things happen. There's a body of water that lies still and low just southeast of downtown. It's called Lady Bird Lake. You've probably seen it on postcards or Instagram. Joggers crossing the boardwalk, kayaks drifting in the golden light of sunset. A peaceful place, a beautiful place. But over the past several years, the lake has gained a totally different reputation, one far less idyllic. A pattern has emerged, quiet but undeniable. Young men, mostly in their 20s or early 30s, disappearing after a night downtown. Often spotted last near Rainy Street, a vibrant strip of bars and clubs. Hours or days later, their bodies are found in the water, fully clothed, no obvious wounds, no clear signs of struggle. Authorities call them tragic drownings, accidents, a sad but simple explanation. But many others believe there is more to the story. Tonight, we float slowly through this mystery and listen to the whispers of what some are calling the work of a serial killer, and others something stranger still. So get comfortable and come with me now to the edge of the water. It all began quietly. From 2008 to 2019, numerous men would go missing, whose bodies would later be recovered in Lady Bird Lake. Police would often rule these deaths as unfortunate, accidental drownings. One man's death was ruled as a suicide, even though his eyes were taped shut and his hands were found bound with duct tape. In February 2023, Jason John, a 30-year-old athletic man with a bright future, went out on Rainy Street with friends. He was last seen around 2 a.m. walking alone. His body was found a week later floating in Lady Bird Lake. Then came Jonathan Honey, April 2023. He was visiting Austin from Washington, D.C., attending a wedding. He, too, was last seen on Rainy Street. Hours later, his body was pulled from the lake. Each case had eerie similarities. Young, fit men enjoying a night out, last seen near the bars and nightlife. No signs of injury, and always the water. Some of them had alcohol in their systems, and some didn't. Some were found quickly, others days later. But the pattern, well, it was there. Unmistakable to those who were watching closely. And people were watching. Online, Reddit threads began to spark with theories. Locals shared rumors. TikToks began to go viral, drawing attention to this mystery. Some called it a coincidence, but others remembered the smiley face killer theory, a controversial case in the Midwest where dozens of young men drowned under suspicious circumstances, and some believed it was the work of a coordinated killer or group. Was Austin seeing something similar? One post online read,
"Too many young men, too many drownings, all from Rainy Street, all found in Lady Bird Lake. This isn't normal, something's wrong."
People began to get nervous. Joggers said they didn't like passing the lake at night. Bartenders said they kept a closer eye than usual on their customers. Parents warned their sons, "Don't walk home alone." Some pointed to the fence near the lake, or lack of it. Lady Bird Lake isn't actually a swimming lake. It's dammed, murky, and the edges are often steep, slippery, and poorly lit. Some areas don't even have railings. The city, faced with growing fear, put up more fencing, added more lights, and promised more patrols. But the deaths didn't stop. In 2024, 5 more deaths were reported in Lady Bird Lake. And so far in 2025, 2 more. Again, the same circumstances, and again, no answers. Families pleaded for investigations. Friends started GoFundMes to raise awareness. A local crime blog started tracking the deaths with a chilling timeline. The authorities pushed back. The Austin Police Department released multiple statements saying there was no evidence of foul play, no injuries, no sign of an attacker, and no proof of a serial killer. These are tragic accidents, they said. There's no reason to believe that these cases are connected. But for many, that wasn't enough. How could so many healthy young men all make the same fatal mistake? Why were none of them able to call for help? Why were there no witnesses, not even cameras, in an area full of bars and nightlife? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, what if the person or force behind these deaths is still out there? Some theories took a darker turn. Could someone be targeting drunk men, posing as a helpful stranger only to lead them away? Could there be drugs involved or something untraceable? Was someone pushing them into the water? Other voices suggested something less human. Old legends whispered in late-night conversation talked about spirits on the water, drownings as offerings, and water pulling people under who didn't respect its edge. Most people just wanted a clear answer, something to explain why so many lives had ended in the same quiet place. Lady Bird Lake, no longer just a place of peace, but now a place of fear, a place where something or someone waits in the dark. Imagine walking along the edge of the lake at night. The stars reflecting softly on the water, the distant thump of music from Rainy Street behind you. You're alone, maybe a little tipsy, maybe lost in thought. You lean over the rail, or maybe there is no rail. Your foot slips. Or maybe there's a voice behind you that says,
"Hey, need some help?"
And when you turn around, there's no one there. Just the sound of water, and then silence. In recent months, more pressure has mounted. Local podcasters and investigative journalists have dug deeper into the timeline. Some private investigators have offered their own conclusions that these are not random drownings, that someone may be exploiting the vulnerabilities of intoxicated men in a popular party zone. Some believe there's a predator. Others say the city simply hasn't done enough to make the area safe. Still, the official stance remains the same: no foul play. The case is, as of now, unsolved. But if you walk down Rainy Street late at night, you'll see the posters. You'll hear the stories. And if you stand at the edge of Lady Bird Lake, you might feel it too. That quiet pull, that lingering sense that something is waiting just beneath the surface. Tonight, as you rest, know that the city sleeps too. But some stories do not go quietly. They ripple outward like sound on water. They return again and again, no matter how many times we try to dismiss them. Lady Bird Lake remains still, but the mystery goes on. Good night, and sleep well. Hey everyone, and welcome to True Crime Sleep Stories, where mysteries of the past lull you into a world of intrigue and relaxation. I'm your host, Kelly Brink, here to guide you through the shadows of history with a calming and safe touch. Tonight we'll unravel the story of Pearl Bryan and her missing head. So settle in, get comfy, close your eyes, and let this somber story take you on a curious yet calming journey. Before we begin, I have a quick note for my fellow true crime enthusiasts. This September 5th through the 7th, I will be at CrimeCon in Denver, Colorado. You can get 10% off your tickets using my code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at checkout. Plus, if you show me your receipt at my table that you used my code, I'll give you a free signed copy of my book. It's all waiting for you at CrimeCon 2025 in Denver, Colorado this year. You're not going to want to miss it. Now dim the lights, take a deep breath, and join me as we wander into another dark story to soothe your senses. In the chilling winter of 1896, the quiet town of Greencastle, Indiana, was rocked by an event so unsettling it still reverberates through the annals of true crime history. Pearl Bryan, a vibrant 22-year-old who spent her Sundays teaching at the local church, vanished under mysterious circumstances. She was last seen setting off on what her family believed was a mundane trip to visit a friend in Indianapolis. What they didn't know was that Pearl carried a secret. She was 5 months pregnant. Her disappearance soon spiraled into a tale of horror that would grip the nation. Less than a week after her departure, a grisly discovery was made over 150 miles away in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. Pearl's decapitated body was found, with her head severed just below the 5th vertebrae. Despite exhaustive searches, her head was never recovered, casting an enduring shadow of mystery over her tragic fate. Pearl's story began to take shape in the spring of 1895 when she met Scott Jackson, a man whose charm masked a sinister intent. Unbeknownst to her family, Pearl had fallen pregnant by Jackson, who lured her to Cincinnati, Ohio, under the pretense of arranging an abortion. However, instead of offering her the assistance she desperately sought, Jackson orchestrated her murder, forever sealing Pearl's fate in one of the most sensational crimes Northern Kentucky had ever witnessed. Despite the passage of time, Pearl Bryan's story refuses to be forgotten. Her brutal murder and the enigma of her missing head continue to captivate true crime enthusiasts and historians alike. Some even say her restless spirit haunts Bobby Mackey's music world in Wilder, Kentucky, a testament to a life tragically cut short and a mystery that remains unsolved. Pearl Bryan emerged into the world as the youngest of 12 children born to the esteemed Alexander S. Bryan and his wife, Susan Jane. In the rural heart of Greencastle, Indiana, where her father was a pillar of the farming community, Pearl's life unfolded with the promise and potential characteristic of a small-town dream. She proudly completed her education at Greencastle High School in 1892, earning a reputation for her intelligence and dedication. Brimming with youthful optimism and determination, Pearl embarked on a new chapter, dedicating herself to teaching Sunday school, a testament to her nurturing spirit and commitment to her community. However, the fateful decision she made on January 28, 1896 would cast a long shadow over her promising life. Leaving her family's home under the guise of visiting a friend in Indianapolis, Pearl unknowingly set in motion a series of events that would lead to her demise. Pearl's life took a complicated turn when she entered a romantic relationship with Scott Jackson, a promising 28-year-old dental student at the Ohio College of Dental Surgery. Their secret affair resulted in Pearl's pregnancy, a revelation that would stir the conservative waters of her close-knit community. Determined to avert scandal, Pearl's cousin, Will Wood, reached out to Jackson, pleading for a solution to protect the family's honor. Jackson, with unsettling confidence, assured Wood that he could, quote, fix her, a sinister promise documented in the archives of the Enquirer. The correspondence between Jackson and his accomplice, Alonzo Walling, a 20-year-old fellow student and roommate, revealed a chilling conspiracy. Initially, Walling was led to believe that they were to perform a secret abortion. However, as the plan unfurled, it became clear that Jackson harbored a darker intention, to poison Pearl and stage her death as a tragic suicide. The truth of their vile plot was exposed through the autopsy findings, which revealed a brutal and lethal injection as the cause of Pearl's untimely demise. Whether this lethal dose was meant to terminate her pregnancy or silence her forever remains an unsolved mystery, adding yet another layer of intrigue and horror to this grim tale. On a chilling fog-laden morning in February of 1896, a 17-year-old farmhand named Johnny Hewling made a discovery that would shock the small town of Fort Thomas, Kentucky. Cutting across the field near the corner of Highland Avenue and Alexandria Pike, a plot owned by his employer, Colonel John Locke, Johnny stumbled upon the lifeless body of a woman. At first glance, he wasn't sure if the woman was dead or merely intoxicated, as the area was known for its discreet encounters between soldiers and local women. Many women came here with soldiers for secret meetings, Johnny later recounted. Finding someone drunk wasn't unusual. Once alerted to the situation, Colonel Locke summoned a deputy sheriff to investigate. Among those who arrived at the scene was coroner Bob Tingley. What they found was beyond anyone's darkest imaginations. A pool of blood suggested a violent struggle had taken place, and when Tingley turned the body over, the grim truth was revealed. The woman had been decapitated. Despite a thorough search of the surrounding area, the woman's head was nowhere to be found. Bloodhounds followed a scent trail to the Covington Reservoir, but even after it was drained, the search yielded no results. The body was taken to Newport for an autopsy, revealing the woman was 5 months pregnant and had cocaine in her stomach, a possible indication of her killer's earlier intentions. Identification of the body was achieved through a meticulous trace of her custom-made shoes from Greencastle, Indiana. The manufacturer's number led authorities to a shoe store and then to Pearl Bryan's family. In a case that captured national attention and became the talk of the era, 2 promising dental students at the Ohio College of Dental Surgery found their futures irrevocably altered. Scott Jackson, a confident young man with a mind as sharp as his scalpel, was arrested for the brutal murder of Pearl Bryan. His conviction soon implicated his roommate, Alonzo Walling, an enigmatic character whose brooding demeanor masked a pliant nature, easily swayed by Jackson's persuasive charisma. Their trials unveiled a dark narrative of betrayal and deception. Jackson, it seemed, had been entangled in a romance with Bryan for several months. Evidence suggested that on January 31, 1896, Jackson and Walling had lured Bryan to a Cincinnati saloon, slipping cocaine into her drink before ending her life later that night. The presence of cocaine in Bryan's system, confirmed through forensic analysis, painted a damning picture of premeditation. The mystery deepened with the macabre absence of Bryan's head, a grim detail that stoked public fascination and horror. Jackson and Walling offered conflicting accounts, suggesting that her head could be found anywhere from the murky depths of the Ohio River to the sandy stretches of Dayton, Kentucky. Desperate searches around these locales yielded nothing, leading many, including former detective Cal Krim, to speculate that the head met its fiery demise in the furnace of their dental college, a theory that remains unproven to this day. Jackson's trial commenced on April 21st and concluded on May 14, 1896, with Walling's following shortly after from May 26th to June 18th. Both were found guilty of first-degree murder, their fates sealed with a sentence to hang on March 20th, 1897. The execution was a public spectacle of grim efficiency, marred by the botched initial drop that left both men gasping for life in front of the transfixed audience. This case, widely covered by the press, sparked a national frenzy. Citizens flocked to the crime scene, snatching souvenirs, while the local economy capitalized on the tragedy with Pearl Bryan-themed merchandise. The trials were described as theatrical, dubbed the trial of the century by local papers. Amid the turmoil, Jackson and Walling's final days were marked by fear of vigilante justice. Even during a jailbreak at Newport Jail, the duo remained in their cells, protected by heavy police presence against possible lynching. Their execution was a cautious affair, carefully orchestrated despite the palpable tension and the looming threat of mob violence. Jackson, a man of complex background, stood at the gallows with a defiant air, revealing nothing of Bryan's missing head, despite the promise of clemency for Walling if he confessed. His silence sealed both of their fates, and they faced their end with Jackson maintaining his innocence, casting himself as a victim of circumstance rather than a perpetrator of violence. Walling, less composed, trembled as he faced his doom, his final words a desperate plea of innocence. Yet, despite their claims, the execution proceeded, and the gallows behind the Newport Campbell County Courthouse claimed its last victims, etching their story into true crime history. The aftermath of this sensational case left a lasting legacy, immortalizing Bryan's tragic end and the unanswered questions that still haunt those who dig into this unsettling chapter of American history. In Greencastle, Indiana, Pearl Bryan's story remains alive in a hauntingly poignant tradition. Visitors to her grave often leave pennies on her tombstone, a symbolic gesture hoping to reunite her with her missing head on Resurrection Day. Pearl's legacy, as tragic as it is enduring, finds resonance in various cultural expressions. Her gruesome murder inspired numerous folk songs in the 1910s and 1920s, capturing the macabre fascination of the era. American country singer Vernon Dalhart was the first to immortalize her story into a song, recorded in 1926. This was followed by Bradley Kincaid's rendition in 1927, aptly titled Pearl Bryan. Folk musicians like Dick Burnett and Leonard Rutherford also lent their voices to this chilling narrative, ensuring Pearl's story transcended oral folklore. Fast forward to 2001, when the melody of Pearl's tale reverberated through the strings of the Crooked Jades, a San Francisco-based folklore band. Their song echoed in the dark corridors of history, reminding listeners of the enduring mystery. Pearl's story has also captivated the paranormal world. An episode of Ghost Adventures dissected the eerie claims of hauntings at Bobby Mackey's Music World, where Pearl Bryan's spirit is rumored to linger. Her tale has become a staple for many paranormal shows, cementing her presence in the supernatural realm. The question that has haunted imaginations for decades remains unanswered. Where is Pearl Bryan's head? Speculation abounds, with some suggesting that it was sold to medical schools, which, during the late 1800s, accepted body parts without question. Others believe it was discarded in an old well recently uncovered in the basement of Bobby Mackey's Music World. The murder of Pearl Bryan is undeniably tragic, filled with layers of deception and betrayal. While Jackson's guilt seems certain, Walling's involvement remains cloaked in ambiguity. Did he merely aid in concealing the crime, or was he complicit from the start? The cold detachment with which Jackson committed such heinous acts, including the murder of an unborn child, raises disturbing questions about his capacity for cruelty. His willingness to sacrifice Walling to the gallows alongside him offers a chilling insight into his character. Ultimately, the full truth may remain forever out of reach, but Pearl's legacy endures. Her story is a testament to the enduring power of human intrigue and the unrelenting quest for justice, a narrative that invites us to ponder the mysteries that lie unsolved. Thank you for listening to tonight's episode of True Crime Sleep Stories. Lock your doors and be careful who you trust. See you next time. Welcome to True Crime Sleep Stories, where the mysteries of the past lull you into a world of intrigue and relaxation. I'm your host, Kelly Brink, here to guide you through the shadows of history with a calming touch. Tonight, we'll unravel the chilling tale of Maria Swanenburg, better known as Goeie, a woman who nursed her way into the hearts of many, but left poison in her wake. Settle in, close your eyes, and let the somber story of the Pious poisoner take you on a curious yet calming journey. Before we begin, a quick note for my fellow true crime enthusiasts. This September 5th through 7th, I'll be at CrimeCon in Denver, Colorado. You can get 10% off your tickets using my code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at checkout. Plus, if you show your receipt at my table, I'll give you a free signed copy of my book. It's all waiting just for you. Now, dim the lights, breathe deeply, and join me as we wander into another dark story to soothe your night. Maria Swanenburg, also known as Maria Goeie Swanenburg, was one of the most notorious serial killers in Dutch history. Though she was officially convicted of murdering 27 people, it is believed that she may have poisoned at least 65 neighbors and possibly over 90 individuals. In the 19th century town of Leiden, Maria Swanenburg was regarded as a compassionate and selfless nurse. She was the person you called upon when you were ill, even if you couldn't afford to pay her. Her reputation as Goeie painted a picture of altruism and kindness. However, the reality was far more sinister. Swanenburg would visit those in need, and while they hoped for care and recovery, their conditions would deteriorate rapidly, often leading to painful deaths. What many did not know was that Maria had taken out life insurance policies on her victims. The very people who trusted her with their lives unknowingly contributed to her financial gain upon their deaths. This chilling aspect of her story intertwines themes of poverty and murder, revealing how desperation can drive individuals to commit horrendous acts. Maria Swanenburg's tale challenges the notion that the most prolific poisoners or serial killers could not be women. Her actions left a dark mark on history, reminding us that appearances can be deceiving and that evil can often hide behind a mask of benevolence. Maria Swanenburg was born on September 9, 1839 in Leiden, into the bustling household of Clemens Swanenburg and Joanna Dingen. She grew up in humble surroundings. Her family lived in a small workers' cottage that housed 11 family members. The cramped living conditions were rudimentary at best. Her parents slept in a tiny front room, while a small, often outdoor-utilized kitchen occupied the back. The children's sleeping quarters were on the first floor, right under an uninsulated roof that offered little protection from the elements. Nicknamed Goeie, Maria earned a reputation for her kindness, frequently babysitting and caring for the sick and elderly in her neighborhood. Despite her benevolent persona, Maria's upbringing was marred by hardship. With many siblings who succumbed to cholera, her family was no stranger to tragedy. It is likely that Maria received minimal formal education, as evidenced by the X she used to sign her marriage certificate, indicating her inability to write. By the time Maria married Johan van der Linden on May 13, 1968, she was 28 years old and had already given birth to several children. This aspect of her life fueled local gossip, branding her as morally loose, though there was no evidence to support such claims. Her marriage produced 5 sons and 2 daughters and lasted until January 1886. The nature of her relationship with her husband remains unclear due to the loss of trial transcripts in a fire, but there is no concrete reason to assume that there was a lack of affection between them. Shortly after her marriage, 2 of Maria's children died, raising suspicions of foul play. However, further research suggests that cholera, rather than poisoning, was the likely cause of death. These events, coupled with the ongoing misery from her youth, led Maria to develop a drinking problem. It was during this turbulent period that she began her infamous spree of poisoning. In the late 19th century, the city of Leiden, Netherlands, was shrouded in a veil of death and mystery. Epidemics ravaged the population, children withered away, and adults succumbed to mysterious illnesses. Among this backdrop of pervasive mortality, one name became synonymous with death, and that was Maria Swanenburg. Maria, born into a modest family, appeared to be a pillar of the community. She was known for her willingness to help neighbors, often caring for their children, doing their laundry, and assisting in times of need. However, behind her facade of kindness lay a sinister motive that would eventually unravel, revealing her as one of history's most notorious female serial killers. It all began in 1880. Maria's first taste of murder came with the poisoning of her own mother, Joanna. Not long after, her father, Clemens, became her second victim. The deaths of her parents marked the beginning of a killing spree that would span 3 years, claiming the lives of at least 27 people. Maria's weapon of choice was arsenic, a common substance used for pest control. Its effects, when ingested, were devastating. Severe diarrhea would lead to fatal dehydration, while the poison coursed through the bloodstream, wreaking havoc on vital organs. Victims would suffer agonizing headaches, light sensitivity, and ultimately organ failure. It was a slow and excruciating death made all the more horrifying by its frequency. Initially, Maria's murders were driven by financial gain. She cleverly exploited the insurance system of the times, which allowed anyone to take out policies on another person. This was a common practice among poor families who couldn't afford burial costs. By paying the premium herself, Maria ensured that she would benefit financially from her victims' deaths. In many cases, she managed to get herself included in their wills or took out multiple insurance policies on them. The first policy would cover the funeral expenses, while the subsequent ones provided a financial buffer. This money, meant to support grieving families, ended up in Maria's pockets. Her early murders were calculated and cold-blooded, but as time went on, Maria's actions bordered on compulsive. She began poisoning indiscriminately, driven by an insatiable desire to kill. After murdering 2 sisters she was babysitting, she even poisoned the coffee she served to their relatives at the wake. Although they survived, it was clear that Maria's bloodlust knew no bounds. Despite the mounting deaths, no alarms were raised. In the impoverished neighborhood where Maria lived, death was an everyday occurrence. Epidemics, poor sanitation, and a lack of medical care meant that illness and fatalities were common. The community, accustomed to loss, saw nothing unusual in the frequent deaths. Doctors, often too expensive for the working class, were rarely consulted. When they were, their visits were sporadic and often unhelpful. It wasn't until the suspicious death of Hendrik Frankheisen that the truth began to emerge. His death prompted an investigation that would eventually expose Maria Swanenburg's deadly secret. The investigation revealed that Maria had poisoned at least 102 people between the years of 1880 and 1883. Of those, 27 had died, including 16 of her own relatives. The surviving victims, numbering 45, were left with chronic health issues, a grim reminder of Maria's lethal touch. In the quiet streets of 19th century Leiden, the townsfolk whispered about Maria Swanenburg. To many, she was still Goeie, a woman known for her kindness and willingness to help her neighbors. Yet behind her seemingly sweet facade lay a chilling darkness. The illusion shattered one fateful December day in 1883 when the Frankheisen family fell victim to a mysterious illness. Their symptoms, unrelenting vomiting and excruciating pain, raised more than a few eyebrows. Suspicion grew, and it wasn't long before the authorities turned their gaze towards Maria. When they searched her home, they found insurance policies worth small fortunes, all in her name. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered a trail of deceit and death. Interviews with those who knew her unveiled a pattern that was horrifying in its clarity. Families with whom Maria had been closely involved had suffered inexplicable losses. Exhumed bodies revealed the sinister truth. Traces of arsenic, Maria's lethal weapon of choice, were discovered in dozens of corpses. The numbers were staggering. She had poisoned around 65 individuals, dozens of whom had succumbed to her toxic concoctions. Yet many believed the true count of her victims was far higher. At her trial, which commenced on April 23, 1885, the courtroom buzzed with a mixture of revulsion and morbid curiosity. Maria Swanenburg, the woman once trusted and even loved by her neighbors, was exposed as a cold-blooded murderer. The public's outrage was palpable, their betrayal evident. Articles in newspapers dripped with disdain, though some couldn't help but sensationalize her heinous acts. Her small abode became an infamous landmark, a grim reminder of the evil that had festered within. Even her husband was not spared from the public scrutiny. Initially arrested, he was soon released, portrayed by the media as an unfortunate man ensnared by his wife's madness. Yet doubts lingered. With so many attempted poisonings and deaths in his own family, and with Maria profiting immensely from the insurance claims, questions about his possible complicity persisted. How could he not have known? It was a question that haunted many, including Stefan Glassbergen, a local historian who meticulously chronicled Maria's sordid tale. The community's shock led to swift changes in the law. Regulations around arsenic sales tightened, and there was a fervent call among journalists and intellectuals to reinstate the death penalty, if only for Maria. Instead, she was sentenced to life imprisonment in a correctional facility, where she would remain until her death in 1915, after 20 years behind bars. Yet, that local historian, Glassbergen, saw a deeper narrative woven into Maria's story, a reflection of the brutal social conditions of the time, including disease, poverty, and inequality. Maria's choices were undeniably heinous, but they also prompted a poignant question. In a different time, with better social support systems, would she have walked the same dark path? Glassbergen doubted it, suggesting that the oppressive environment of 19th century Leiden played a significant role in her descent into infamy. Maria Swanenburg's story is a chilling reminder of how desperation and opportunity can merge to create a monster. Her tale, veiled in the mists of a bygone era, continues to captivate and horrify, serving as a dark chapter in the annals of criminal history. Thank you for listening to tonight's True Crime Sleep Story. Good night, sleep tight. Be sure to lock those doors. You never know what's lurking on the other side. Imagine this. It's a cold morning on December 1st, 1948, and you're walking along Somerton Beach in South Australia. On a patch of sand not far from the crashing waves lies a man. Dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his body leans casually against a seawall. His legs are stretched out, his feet crossed as if he's simply relaxing by the beach. But there's one catch. He's not breathing, and no one knows who he is or how he got there. This is the story of the Somerton Man, one of Australia's most enduring mysteries that spans espionage theories, cryptic codes, and a puzzling DNA breakthrough. Welcome to another cozy and captivating episode of True Crime Sleep Stories, where today we unravel the enigma of a man who took secrets to his grave and possibly beyond. Light a candle, crawl under your coziest blanket, and prepare to be transported into a tale of unanswered questions and whispers from the past. But before we dive in, I've got some exciting news. Mark your calendars for CrimeCon 2025, happening September 5th through the 7th in Denver, Colorado. Come meet me in person, chat all things true crime, and snag an exclusive signed copy of one of my books. Be sure to use my code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at checkout to get 10% off your tickets. Plus, as a special bonus, when you use that code, you'll receive a free copy of my True Crime Sleep Stories book. Just DM me for details. Now, settle in, relax, and let's explore the curious case of the Somerton Man. Who knows, by the end of this episode, you might find yourself uncovering a piece of the puzzle that's eluded the world for decades. It all began at 6:30 a.m. when a couple walking along Somerton Beach spotted the body. At first glance, they thought the man was simply asleep. But as they came closer, it became clear that something was very wrong. The police arrived soon after and began inspecting the scene. The man appeared to be in his 40s and was dressed immaculately in a white shirt, brown trousers, a tie, and a double-breasted jacket. Oddly, every single label had been removed from his clothing. Was this an attempt to hide his identity, or something else entirely? The contents of his pockets only deepened the mystery. There was an unused train ticket, a bus ticket, a packet of juicy fruit gum, an aluminum comb manufactured in the U.S., a half-smoked cigarette, and 4 matches. No wallet, no identification, just everyday items that seemed to lead nowhere. Witnesses later reported seeing a man matching his description lying in the same spot the previous night. Some said they saw him raise his arm weakly, but by 7 p.m., he hadn't moved again. They assumed he was drunk or asleep, never imagining he would soon become the focus of a decades-long investigation. In January of 1949, over a month after the man's death, a suitcase was found in the Adelaide railway station. It had been checked in the day before the Somerton man's body was discovered. Inside were everyday items like shaving gear and pajamas, but also peculiar things like a stenciling brush and a pair of scissors with sharpened points. The suitcase also contained some marked clothing, including a tie labeled T. Keene and a laundry bag with Keene stitched into it. Police thought they had their first clue. But after an exhaustive investigation, they found no missing person named Keene in any English-speaking countries. It's almost as if Keene was a deliberate red herring placed there to mislead anyone attempting to trace his identity. And then came the breakthrough, or so it seemed. A small, scrunched-up piece of paper was discovered sewn into a secret fob pocket in the Somerton man's trousers. On it were 2 Persian words written in a distinctive font. Tamam Shud, which translates to, "It is finished." The phrase was traced back to a rare edition of the Rubaiyat, a collection of Persian poetry often associated with themes of life, death, and finality. Police appealed to the public, and shockingly, a matching copy of the book was handed in. It had been found in a car near the beach around the time of the man's death. As investigators examined the book, they found faint indentations left from handwriting. There were 2 phone numbers and what appeared to be a strange, encrypted code. One of the numbers led to a woman named Jessica Thompson, who lived just a few hundred meters from where the body was found. Jessica reportedly became visibly distressed when questioned about the case, but she insisted she did not know the man. The other clue, the cryptic code, provided no answers. Despite experts analyzing it for decades, no one has been able to crack its meaning. Was it a message, coordinates, or simply a fragment of gibberish? The mystery only deepened as the years went by. As the case gained international attention, theories began swirling. Some suggested he was a spy, an idea that wasn't that far-fetched given the Cold War tensions at the time. The cryptic code and the secrecy surrounding his identity all seemed to point to espionage. Others speculated that he had been involved in a romantic affair with Jessica Thompson, and that the copy of the Rubaiyat was an intimate tie between the two. But Thompson consistently denied knowing the man, leaving only more questions in her wake. Fast forward to 2022. After decades of dead ends, a breakthrough came in the form of modern DNA technology. Using a sample of hair preserved in the Somerton man's plaster death mask, genetic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick and Professor Derek Abbott revealed his identity to the world. The Somerton man was identified as Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker from Melbourne, born in 1905. But even with this revelation, uncertainty lingers. Why was Webb in Adelaide? Why had all identifying labels been removed from his clothing? Was Tamam Shud a message of despair or something more sinister? And why did Jessica Thompson react so strangely when shown his plaster bust decades earlier? Even now, the case of the Somerton man leaves more questions than answers. While we now have a name, Carl Webb, the mystery of his death and the events leading up to it remain shrouded in shadows. Did he die from an untraceable poison? Was he caught in the clandestine web of espionage? Or was he a deeply troubled soul carrying the weight of personal battles to his grave? The Somerton man's story reminds us of one thing. We may unravel the facts, but the truth sometimes stays just out of reach. The mystery of the Somerton man is one that spans over 7 decades, capturing the imaginations of true crime aficionados, amateur detectives, and historians alike. But what do you think? Could one of you crack the code on the Rubaiyat? Or perhaps you've got a theory investigators didn't cover. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and always keep a notebook handy. You never know what mysteries you might stumble upon. Thanks for tuning in to this little episode of True Crime Sleep Stories. We'll see you soon with a full episode. Welcome to True Crime Sleep Stories, the podcast where we pair captivating tales of the past with the warmth of a cozy night in. I am so happy you've decided to join me tonight. So go ahead, settle in, get comfy, maybe pour yourself a soothing cup of tea or grab your favorite blanket. Tonight, we're going to take a wild ride back in history with the Ballad of Bonnie and Clyde. It's a story of love, danger, and life on the run. But before we jump into the chaos and romance of these infamous outlaws, I've got something special to share with you. I will be at CrimeCon 2025 coming up September 5th through the 7th in Denver, Colorado, and I would absolutely love to meet you there. Even better, when you use my discount code, which is BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at checkout when you buy your tickets, you'll not only save on your ticket, but you can contact me to receive a free signed copy of one of my True Crime Sleep Stories books. So that's right, I'll give you a little keepsake just for helping me out by using my discount code for CrimeCon 2025. So mark your calendars and grab that discount while you can. And now, get cozy, let's slip into the thrilling world of Bonnie and Clyde. On a lonely, sun-drenched stretch of road just outside Gibbsland, Louisiana, the silence was shattered by the thunderous roar of gunfire. Bullets tore through the dusty air, splintering the windshield of their stolen Ford V8 as Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow went limp under the ceaseless barrage. Within seconds, it was over. The young lovers who had captured the attention and terror of an entire nation lay lifeless, their bodies riddled with bullet holes, their tale written in blood. This is where their story ended, but it's far from where it began. Bonnie and Clyde were more than criminals on the run. They were icons of rebellion, lovers defying the odds in a time of despair. To some, they were heartless killers. To others, they were tragic figures trapped by circumstance and driven by a dream of freedom in the unforgiving grip of the Great Depression. Together, they carved their names into the annals of American history, leaving behind a legacy that has outlived the sound of that final gunfire. Their story has become legend, adapted for film, glorified in ballads, and dissected by historians. But the truth? It's far grittier, much bloodier, and infinitely more human than the myths allow. Bonnie and Clyde were living proof of the chaotic collision between love and desperation, the delicate balance between devotion and destruction. They burned brightly and chaotically, leaving behind a trail of broken glass, empty shells, and stolen dreams. This episode doesn't just recount their rise and fall, it takes you into the heart of their tumultuous world. It explores the magnetic pull between them, forged in hardship and fueled by defiance. It examines the choices they made and the devastating consequences that followed. Above all, it seeks to answer the question that lingers even today. Why do we remain so captivated by Bonnie and Clyde? Their story isn't just history, it's love and rebellion, sacrifice and consequence, all tangled in a narrative that refuses to die. And it begins here on a dusty road in Louisiana where the air still echoes with the thunder of that final act. If the final chapter of Bonnie and Clyde's story unfolded in a violent storm of bullets, their beginnings were shaped by the quiet erosion of hope. To truly understand the choices they made and the paths they followed, you have to go back to the dusty plains of rural Texas where hardship and dreams collided to mold two very different lives that would ultimately intertwine with devastating consequences. Bonnie Parker was born October 1st, 1910 in the town of Rowena, Texas. Her early years started with promise, but tragedy soon marked her life. When she was just 4 years old, her father passed away, leaving her mother to shoulder the burden of raising Bonnie and her siblings alone. The family eventually moved to the bustling slums of West Dallas, a stark contrast to the quieter life they had once known. Despite the struggles around her, Bonnie stood out. She was bright, imaginative, and fiercely ambitious. She adored writing poetry, dreaming of a life that extended far beyond the confines of her modest home. Fame, whether it was on the stage or in Hollywood, seemed to shimmer on the edge of her horizon. But life had other plans. At just 15 years old, 6 days before her 16th birthday, Bonnie married Roy Thornton, a reckless young man who promised adventure but brought heartbreak instead. The marriage quickly grew stale, and Roy's brushes with the law only added to Bonnie's sense of feeling trapped and disconnected. Although they never formally divorced, Bonnie drifted away from him, holding tightly to her dreams while the weight of her reality bore down harder each day. Clyde Barrow, on the other hand, was born into hardship from the very start. He arrived on March 24, 1909, in Ellis County, Texas, the fifth of 7 children in a family struggling to make ends meet as tenant farmers. By the time Clyde was a child, his family had abandoned the land, moving to the harsh, poverty-stricken neighborhoods of West Dallas in search of better prospects. Life there was hard. Cramped homes, empty tables, and constant reminders of what they didn't have. But Clyde was more than just a product of his environment. He was sharp and quick-witted, with a charm that often masked his growing frustration towards the world. Poverty may have been the catalyst, but it was Clyde's mounting resentment towards authority that pushed him to act. He turned to petty thefts, stealing whatever he could to ease the struggles his family faced, or perhaps to rebel against them altogether. He was clever enough to get away with it too, at least for a while. 2 young lives shaped by struggles they never asked for were unknowingly edging towards one another. Bonnie, restless and longing for grandeur, Clyde, hardened by deprivation, but charismatic enough to dream of something better. Neither had yet crossed the line that would make them the infamous figures they would become. But their origins, steeped in poverty, shaped by loss, and defined by defiance, set the stage for everything that came next. Their love and their crimes were born from these roots, tangled in a history that left little room for escape. Their partnership was still just a future waiting to happen, but the seeds of rebellion and ambition were there, growing quietly in the shadows of West Dallas. All it would take was a spark to ignite them. In January of 1930, West Dallas was a patchwork of battered homes and unpaved roads, a rough backdrop for lives scraping by. Among this grit, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow met for the first time at a mutual friend's house. The air that day buzzed with the electricity of chance. Though neither of them could know it in that moment, this meeting would change everything. Bonnie, 19 years old and trapped in a loveless marriage to a man serving time for robbery, was already bruised by life, but far from defeated. She clung to her romantic ideals, still envisioning herself as a star of some grand adventure. Her charm was undeniable, and for someone like Clyde, it was magnetic. Clyde, at 21, was charming in his own right. A smooth talker and a casual confidence that masked the sharp edges of his poverty-hardened past. He was ambitious, clever, and he had a knack for making an impression. When he walked into that room, it wasn't long before Bonnie noticed him, and when their eyes met, something clicked. The connection was instant and undeniable. They talked, laughed, and shared glimpses of their inner worlds. Bonnie's poetry and yearning for more, and Clyde's dreams of escaping the grind and grabbing life by the horns. For Bonnie, Clyde represented excitement, a break from the monotony and restlessness she had been drowning in. For Clyde, Bonnie's fierce intelligence and loyalty promised a partner like no other. It wasn't just attraction. There was an understanding between them, a shared hunger for something more. Their bond may have continued to blossom uninterrupted had fate not stepped in. A few weeks after their meeting, Clyde was arrested for a series of petty crimes. For many, this might have been the end of their story, a fleeting romance extinguished, but not for Bonnie. Her devotion was fierce from the start. She visited Clyde in jail, proving her steadfast loyalty not just with words, but with action. It was Bonnie who smuggled a small handgun into Clyde during one of her visits, a bold act that signaled just how deeply she was already committed. The gun helped Clyde escape in March 1930, leading to a brief, wild taste of freedom. But freedom, as it would turn out, was fleeting. Clyde was recaptured just weeks later and sentenced to hard labor at the brutal Eastham Prison Farm in Texas. While Clyde languished behind bars, enduring the abuses and indignities of a broken prison system, Bonnie waited. 2 years passed, but her loyalty to him never wavered. For Clyde, the time in prison only hardened him further, shaping the man he would become. His bitterness toward authority deepened, and his desire to break free, permanently this time, grew more urgent. Everything changed in early 1932 when Clyde was finally paroled. His release wasn't just freedom from those chains, it was the beginning of something much bigger. Reunited with Bonnie, he wasn't the same man who had walked into that West Dallas house 2 years before. The charm and wit were still there, but now there was a simmering anger just beneath the surface, a determination to never be caged again. Together, Bonnie and Clyde were ready to take on the world, or at least carve out their own corner of it. Clyde Barrow walked out of prison in 1932, but he wasn't the same man who had gone in. The Eastham Prison Farm was more than cages and hard labor. It was a crucible of violence and cruelty that shaped him into someone colder, angrier, and infinitely more dangerous. He had entered as a petty thief, but the abuse he endured behind bars hollowed out whatever hope for reform might have existed. Clyde's bitter hatred for the legal system now consumed him, fueling a growing resolve to retaliate against the forces he believed had wronged him. For him, the law was no longer a simple authority to fear. It was an enemy to fight. Bonnie, too, had changed in those 2 long years. She had waited for Clyde, clinging to her romantic ideals like a lifeline in a sea of loneliness. When the prison gates finally opened and Clyde walked free, Bonnie didn't hesitate. She was at his side, as devoted as ever, ready to build the life they dreamed of, no matter how dangerous it might be. The reality they faced, however, was bleak. Jobs were scarce, and their names carried little more than stigma. What began as a desperate struggle to survive soon spiraled into small-time crime, robbing gas stations, grocery stores, and hardware shops. Their first few robberies were clumsy affairs lacking the finesse that would later define their reputation. But through every dashed escape or hasty plan, Bonnie was there. She wasn't just Clyde's partner in crime, she was his anchor. A defining moment in their early days came late one evening after a particularly harrowing escape. Exhausted, Bonnie nursed a minor gunshot wound Clyde had suffered in their sprint from the law. She pressed her hand to his face, looking into his tired eyes, and whispered, "We'll make it through this." It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes about her loyalty and their unshakable bond. Whatever life threw at them, they were determined to face it together. Despite their modest beginnings, bigger ambitions were soon on the horizon. By late 1932, their growing recklessness and notoriety caught the attention of Clyde's older brother, Buck Barrow. Recently released from his own stint in prison, Buck had tried to go straight, but Clyde's charisma was irresistible, and Buck soon joined his younger brother's exploits. With Buck came Blanche, his wife, who was dragged reluctantly into their world of danger and chaos. Together they formed the core of what would become the Barrow Gang. This newly expanded crew brought more audacity to their escapades, but also more risks. They pulled off a string of robberies that included banks, a step up from the gas stations and corner stores of Clyde's early days. These weren't smooth heists out of Hollywood films. They often ended in wild car chases, shootouts, and narrowly avoided traps. Clyde was obsessed with fast cars, and his skill behind the wheel became one of their greatest assets. When a robbery went south, he relied on speed and daring maneuvers to outrun law enforcement, often kicking up clouds of dust on rural roads and cutting through towns like a phantom under the cover of night. But the Barrow Gang's criminal trajectory was littered with mistakes. Early on, their lack of careful planning led to sloppy escapes, injuries, and strained relationships within the group. Blanche, in particular, struggled with the violence that seemed to follow them everywhere they went, a stark contrast to the man she had married in Buck. Clyde's temper, hardened by prison and frustration, sometimes boiled over, pushing his crew to the brink of collapse. Yet for all their errors, the Barrow Gang was evolving, learning from each disaster how to be faster, smarter, and more ruthless. By the end of 1933, Bonnie and Clyde were no longer small-time criminals. They were becoming infamous. Their lives were marked by adrenaline-fueled robberies, narrow escapes, and the steely resolve of a couple who had embraced their roles as outlaws. But the path they'd chosen was a dangerous one, and the mistakes they made in these early days would eventually catch up to them. For now, though, the road stretched endlessly before them, and they drove with fury like they could outrun the rest of the world. By 1933, Bonnie and Clyde's story was leaving behind the shadows of small-time crime and blazing into a new and dangerous frontier. Their robberies had grown bolder, targeting larger establishments like banks, and their methods had turned darker, laced with increasing violence. Each heist seemed to up the stakes, with shootouts becoming a near-inevitable climax. The Barrow Gang's audacity knew no bounds, and their penchant for chaos soon gripped the nation in both fear and morbid fascination. Their frequent clashes with law enforcement only added fuel to the fire. The gang's trademark Ford V8 roared down highways and back roads, the powerful engine almost as famous as the fugitives it carried. Clyde, with his uncanny skill behind the wheel, could thread them through near-impossible escape routes, weaving through gunfire and slipping away from police traps. These harrowing getaways were almost operatic in their intensity, a storm of screeching tires, deafening gunshots, and desperate, dust-filled chases. But the risks of such an unforgiving life couldn't be outrun forever. A harsh reminder came one sweltering summer evening in 1933. After a robbery gone wrong, Clyde pushed his getaway car too hard, and the overworked engine failed him. The car swerved violently off the road and crashed down a small ravine. The heat from the radiator and a spilled chemical battery erupted, and Bonnie was trapped inside, flames crackling at her legs before Clyde could pull her free. The burns Bonnie suffered were excruciating, searing her skin and leaving her barely able to walk. For weeks, Clyde cared for her with a tenderness few would have believed him capable of. He gently washed her wounds, ripped his own shirts into makeshift bandages, and carried her when she couldn't walk. Whatever doubts might have existed about their bond were silenced in those months. The legendary outlaw was, at his core, a man utterly devoted to his partner. Bonnie, fragile yet undaunted, remained resolute. She hadn't chosen this life only to turn back when it got hard, burns or no burns. Meanwhile, their trail of daring crimes and run-ins with the law only served to intensify the public's captivation with the duo. Newspapers splashed their names and faces across headlines in bold type. Photographs, often recovered from abandoned hideouts, showed them posing with defiant smirks, pistols in hand, young, armed, and dangerous. These images electrified readers, feeding the curious and thrilling those enamored with the idea of two lovers standing defiantly against the system. The press, intentionally or not, crafted mystery around Bonnie and Clyde. They became symbols of rebellion in a country still staggering under the Great Depression. While the law saw them as ruthless killers and thieves, many working-class Americans saw something else: young outlaws thumbing their noses at authority and carving their own paths in a world that seemed stacked against them. Bonnie, with her sharp features and sophisticated poses, gained a certain tragic allure. Clyde, with his sly grin, was the charming bandit, a modern-day Robin Hood with no qualms about taking what he wanted. Yet the reality was far from romantic. For all the headlines and photographs, life on the run was grueling. Each robbery, no matter how carefully planned, ended in chaos. Bullets flying, bodies dropping, and the gang fleeing the scene in their battered Ford. They rarely stayed in one place for long, always conscious of the bounty on their heads, growing higher with each passing day. Nights were spent in abandoned farmhouses or under open skies, eating canned food and nursing wounds. Even so, the legend of Bonnie and Clyde grew irresistible, fed by a press eager for larger-than-life stories and a public all too eager to believe in the fantasy. They were no longer just criminals, they were icons, and as their notoriety swelled, so too did the stakes. Each heist, every shootout, they all led to an inevitable question hovering just over the horizon. How long could the fire burn before it consumed them completely? For now, though, Bonnie and Clyde pressed on, their passion for one another blazing like a torch lighting their path. They remained inseparable, bound by a love as fervent as the chaos that surrounded them, and against the backdrop of a country on edge, they clung to that love as they sped forward into even greater peril. By 1934, the relentless march of time and the burden of their notoriety were beginning to tighten the noose around Bonnie and Clyde. Their once daring escapades and narrow escapes had given way to a new, suffocating reality. A life spent dodging shadows, peering over shoulders, and wondering who might betray them next. The Barrow Gang, once a small-knit crew bound by loyalty, had fragmented. Members were dead, jailed, or had simply vanished, leaving Bonnie and Clyde increasingly isolated as they roamed the back roads of the American South. Pressure from law enforcement had been mounting for months. Texas Ranger Frank Hamer, a stoic and methodical lawman with a reputation for success, was brought out of retirement specifically to hunt them down. Hamer was relentless in his pursuit, combing through leads, piercing together their movements, and building a network of informants. Meanwhile, Clyde's growing recklessness only exacerbated their peril. Their movements were less calculated, their allies fewer, and the net around them drew tighter with each passing day. The inevitable betrayal came quietly as it often does. A former accomplice, worn down by law enforcement threats and promises of leniency, divulged enough details about Bonnie and Clyde's habits and routes to give Hamer and his posse the edge they needed. It was in Bienville Parish, Louisiana, near a quiet, dusty road flanked by trees and scrub, that their long run came to a violent and abrupt end. The ambush was set with precision. Hamer and his hand-picked posse, hardened men, experienced in violence, waited in silence as dawn broke over the humid Louisiana landscape. The air was thick with tension, the sounds of nature drowned out by hearts pounding in anticipation. Clyde's Ford V8 approached slowly, its once pristine exterior now battered from endless chases, its cabin carrying the weight of their frenetic years on the run. Inside, Bonnie and Clyde were likely unaware that every mile of that road was drawing them closer to their final moments together. The attack was swift and merciless. The posse opened fire before the car even had a chance to come to a full stop. Bullets rained down in a deafening fury, splintering glass, ripping through metal, and riddling the occupants inside. Clyde, behind the wheel, had no time to react. Bonnie, seated beside him, barely had a chance to scream. The shooting, ceaseless and unyielding, went on until the car was a skeletal frame of smoldering metal, its tires blown, its windows shattered. When the dust settled and the smoke cleared, silence returned to the remote road. The bodies of Bonnie and Clyde slumped together in the front seat, riddled with dozens of bullet holes. Blood pooled beneath them, soaking the tattered floorboards of the car. Their personal belongings, haunting relics of lives lived on the edge, remained untouched amidst the carnage. Bonnie's poetry notebook, filled with melancholic verses that hinted at a longing for something more, lay beside her. A half-eaten sandwich, mundane but poignant in its humanity, sat on the dashboard. Frank Hamer and his men stood solemnly as they surveyed the bloody scene. Each of them knew they had brought down two of the most infamous criminals in American history. But it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like tragedy. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow had lived fast and dangerously, thrust into a life they could neither escape nor control. And now, in the light of a Louisiana morning, their story had ended in a hail of bullets. The news of their deaths swept across the nation like wildfire. Crowds mobbed funeral parlors and lined streets, desperate for a glimpse of the outlaws even in death. Photographs of their shattered car, riddled with more than 100 bullet holes, blanketed the front pages. Opinion on the couple was divided. To some, they were ruthless killers who got what they deserved. To others, they were tragic figures, a pair of star-crossed lovers who had lived outside the confines of societal rules, only to pay the ultimate price. What remained, however, was the undeniable weight of their love. Even in death, they were together. The final curtain had fallen on their storied lives, but the legend of Bonnie and Clyde, equal parts romance and rebellion, would live on. Their dreams, their flaws, their rebellion against a world that seemed determined to grind them down, they were all immortalized in that fateful moment on a quiet Louisiana road. And so, with the end of their lives came the birth of their myth, destined to capture imaginations and inspire stories for generations to come. The news of Bonnie and Clyde's bloody demise reverberated across the nation, sparking reactions as polarized as the couple themselves. For law enforcement, it was a triumphant moment. Headlines lauded Frank Hamer and his posse for their unflinching resolve in bringing down two of America's most wanted criminals. Their precision and the dramatic nature of the ambush marked a major victory in the ongoing battle against the lawlessness that had gripped the nation during the Great Depression. Celebrations erupted within police ranks, with the infamous duo laid to rest as a warning to other criminals on the run. Yet among the public, the reaction was far more complex. Thousands flocked to view Bonnie and Clyde's bullet-ridden car, its gruesome contents a morbid testament to their violent lives. Crowds lined up for hours outside funeral homes, desperate for just a glimpse of the couple. To the disenchanted masses of the Depression era, Bonnie and Clyde had represented something far more nuanced than mere criminals. They were symbols of defiance, young lovers from humble beginnings who had taken on a system that many felt had betrayed them. Their deaths struck a chord of sorrow even among those who condemned their actions, for they embodied a romantic tragedy that transcended judgment. It wasn't long before their story began its transformation into legend. Films, songs, and books emerged, glorifying their escapades and framing them as outlaws driven by love rather than greed or malice. Bonnie's wistful poetry, uncovered amid the blood-stained chaos of their deaths, painted her as a dreamer, yearning for a life she could never have. Clyde, depicted as a loyal protector, became a figure of undying devotion in an unforgiving world. Together they were cast as modern-day Robin Hoods, flawed perhaps, but relatable in their humanity. But beneath the romanticized veneer lay a far grittier reality. Were they villains to be condemned for their violence, or victims of a society that left them with few alternatives? Their upbringing in poverty, marked by a desperation that bred crime, begged the question of whether their downfall was inevitable. Could a different system, a kinder, more forgiving one, have saved them? Ultimately, their story is a testament to how love can be both a sanctuary and a dangerous force, binding two people together even as it drives them towards ruin. It's a story of hardship and rebellion, of choices born of desperation, and of the haunting consequences of those choices. The lives of Bonnie and Clyde are woven with themes that continue to echo profoundly through history, each thread offering insight into the human condition. Foremost among these is the theme of love amid hardship. Their unwavering devotion to one another was both their greatest source of strength and their undoing. Together they found solace in a world that often sought to crush them, yet that same deep bond forged in shared adversity pushed them further down a path of destruction. Their partnership was both an anchor and a weight, tethering them to choices that sealed their fate. Equally important is the theme of poverty and desperation. Bonnie and Clyde were born into hardscrabble lives during one of the most challenging periods in American history. Their early years, shaped by scarcity and struggle, carved out a worldview where survival often meant breaking the law. Their crimes were less about malice and more about their fight against a system that seemed indifferent to their suffering. They became the faces of a broader societal tension, individuals caught between the crushing weight of poverty and a yearning for something better. Yet perhaps the most enduring theme is the battle of fiction versus reality. The mythologized version of their story, a couple of dashing outlaws in love, challenging authority with flair and romance, often overshadows the truth. Bonnie and Clyde's crimes were undeniably ruthless at times, and the suffering they inflicted on others cannot be ignored. However, the world prefers to remember them as rebels, elevated by the romance of their tale. This dichotomy between who they were and how they're remembered speaks to humanity's deep need for heroes, even flawed ones, in the face of systemic injustice and societal hardship. Through these themes, their story asks timeless questions about the intersection of love, adversity, and morality. It challenges us to consider the ways in which systems of power shape individual lives and actions. And it reminds us how easily history's harsh edges are softened by the allure of a good story. And so we're left with the enduring enigma of Bonnie and Clyde. Were they ruthless criminals who cared little for the lives they disrupted? Or were they desperate souls shaped by a world that left them with few options? Were they villains or tragic figures playing out the inevitable script of their time? Perhaps, as is so often the case with great tales, the truth lies somewhere in the gray space between absolutes. It's a tale that forces us to reckon with themes of love both fiery and fragile, with hardship that breeds defiance, and with the romantic lens through which we choose to view the past. Even now, their story continues to fascinate, a reminder of the enduring appeal of outlaws in the American imagination. They invite us to reflect on the systems that create such figures and the choices, both their own and society's, that lead to such tragic ends. Ultimately, their story is a mirror, reflecting the complexities of human nature and the enduring hunger for stories of rebellion and romance. Bonnie and Clyde lived fast and died young, but their lives linger in the collective memory, asking us, even now, to consider the weight of love, the cost of defiance, and the fragile line between villain and victim. Thank you for listening to today's True Crime Sleep Story. Be sure to check the show notes for links to the YouTube and Instagram. If you're interested in going to CrimeCon 2025 in Denver, Colorado, please use my discount code, BRINK. It helps us so much if you use that code, and everybody who uses the code can DM me or stop by my table at CrimeCon for your free copy of True Crime Sleep Stories Volume 1, 2, or 3. Until next time, stay safe, sleep tight, and be sure to lock your doors at night. Bye-bye.